people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
News. Okay, we'll start with this. Boxing insider Rick Glacier reacted to the news that Shakur Stevenson is being paid a hefty sum for what can only be described as a tune-up fight, a keep busy fight. Rick said, great for Shakur, but anyone that would pay Shakur $5 million to fight a Joe Cordina type should let someone else negotiate for them. Ridiculous.
You think Joe's a tune-up fight?
Listen, if it were different circumstances, you'd get a different answer. But a guy coming off a knockout loss at 130, debuting at 135 against Shakur, you do the math. If it were Joe Cordina moving up after unifying the super featherweight division, or just moving up off a win instead of a loss, I could see. But in this instance, it looks a lot like a tune-up fight, like a keep busy fight.
And if this is what you're paying him for this kind of fight, what is he gonna want for a more lively opponent, for a more spirited fight? What kind of money?
Twitter user that goes by the name Kofi said, "Stop hating, Rick. Damn," to which Rick responded, "There's no hate. I understand the business. You obviously don't."
Business? What about the business?
The fighters, their teams, and their inflated financial demands, what they want, are a big part of the reason that so many fights end up on pay-per-view. Likely why this one did too.
Did you see how many people are already complaining about that? That they're not going to buy the pay-per-view. They're going to skip the undercard, and they're just going to watch the main event. They're just going to watch Better B versus Bivol on ESPN Plus because it's not a pay-per-view.
For anyone that is supporting Shakur Stevenson being paid $5 million for the likes of Joe Cordina, I wonder how many of those individuals are going to buy that pay-per-view.
Because it's all interconnected.
There's no such thing as a free lunch. If you're giving Shakur $5 million, what are you giving Joe? And what are you giving the other fighters on the undercard? What are you paying them? As that is likely the reason this is being billed as a pay-per-view.
Where a lot of customers feel it should not be. Here in America, it shouldn't be. Maybe in the UK, but not the US.
You give Shakur that kind of money for that kind of fight, the only hope of getting some of it back is to put it on pay-per-view. But that comes at an additional cost to me and you. It makes boxing more expensive to watch.
For us.
So when you're celebrating Shakur getting that kind of money for that kind of fight, are you actually going to buy it?
Since you think this is all cause for celebration.
Inflated purse demands are a big part of the reason there are more pay-per-views now than there have ever been. And being a boxing fan now is more expensive than it has ever been. And that's what Rick's talking about. That's bad for business. The more paywalls that go up, the less eyes the sport of boxing gets, because everybody's not going to shell out $80 every time you put on a pay-per-view. They're not. The more often that happens, the less people watch boxing.
That's the dichotomy.
So maybe it's good for Shakur and Shakur's bank account that he's getting a sum of $5 million for what can only be described as a keep busy fight. It's good for him, but it's not good for the sport. Because if this is what you're getting for this kind of fight, what are you going to require for a better fight with a better fighter?
Hopefully Turkey is still in boxing, making these cash injections to satisfy whatever that financial demand is going to be. Because essentially what you have in Shakur now is a fighter that you used to be able to see at no additional charge. On ESPN Plus. Now you have to pay per view. You think that's a good thing? What it reminds me of is the Lopez versus Camboso situation, and how Lopez was not happy with the price that Top Rank set for the fight. In comes Triller with all their empty promises, something to the tune of $6 million for the show.
And people celebrated that. People that were none the wiser, not realizing if Triller puts up that kind of dough for that fight, What that means is you'll need to pay per view to see it.
They didn't realize it at first, but that was Triller's plan. Thankfully, they ended up defaulting, and the rights to the fight went to Matchroom that billed it as a regular fight, not a box office fight.
But if Triller had kept the rights and Triller had billed it as a pay-per-view, how many of the people that you saw celebrating, how many of them do you think would have bought it?
How many people celebrating Shakur's purse do you think are going to buy this?
I appreciate what Turkey's trying to do for the sport. Pay to make the big fights happen. Pay to do it. Pay to see it.
But more attention to detail and infrastructure for the health and growth of the sport.
More attention needs to go into the regular schedule of fights. That's where fighters and reputations are built. That's where pay-per-view stars are born.
That's where it happens.
Sorry to say, I don't think Shakur Stevenson, after his last two performances, is in a place where you need to pay per view to see him. I don't see a box office fighter short of a big name dance partner, and that ain't Joe. Not in America.
If it were Javante,
That's box office. That's pay-per-view worthy. This is not.
they'll see it in the numbers.
Numbers so low, after they're all in, they might feel like they should have just given it away. Build it as a regular fight.
Make it part of the regular schedule. In America. Emphasis on in America.
Men's junior middleweight news, a fight that might actually be box office worthy if they make it. The WBO has ordered Sebastian Fundora to face Terence Crawford. Freshly crowned junior middleweight title holder Terence Crawford has made a bold stroke in moving to become the first undisputed three-division champion in the four-belt era by invoking his right to meet new two-belt junior middleweight champion Sebastian Fundora. The WBO on Wednesday ordered Terence Crawford to meet Sebastian Fundora, declaring that the sides have 30 days to strike an agreement or the belt will be sent to purse bid. Crawford stands as the WBO's interim junior middleweight title holder, and WBO in-house attorney Gustavo Olivieri said the organization is enforcing its mandatory bout accordingly to have only one champion per division. The WBO don't mess about. Don't mess around. This was the ticking time bomb that was lying in wait for Sebastian Fundora, who seems to have plans to face Errol Spence Jr., not the man that beat him, not Terence Crawford. Should both sides agree to a fight, the bout, Olivieri said, should occur by year's end. Crawford, a four-division champion who turns 37 September 28th, has previously sought to parlay his August 3rd unanimous decision victory over former WBA champion Israel Madrimov into a shot at unified super middleweight champion Saul Canelo Alvarez. He's not having any luck in that department.
Will he have any in this one?
Crawford of Omaha, Nebraska, reportedly went as far as telling Saudi Arabia's Turkey El Al Sheikh that he was taking a Canelo or bust attitude after El Al Sheikh said he floated the idea of Crawford meeting unbeaten WBC interim junior middleweight belt holder Virgil Ortiz next. Yet the prospect of meeting Fundora, 26, also proves tantalizing because the Coachella, California product wears the WBC and WBO straps by virtue of his bloody March 30th split decision upset win over former champion Tim Kazoo of Austria.
From Australia.
Kazoo is moving towards a fight with the only other champion at the weight, Russia's Bakram Murtazaliev, for his IBF on October 19th in Florida. And Zhu has repeatedly maintained he is willing to fight anyone in the division. Should Crawford become an undisputed three-weight champion, he would join the great Henry Armstrong, who accomplished the feat in the 1930s.
Even now, I see people try to downplay Terence Crawford's resume, even though he's literally fought 4 or 5 champions, taken belts from them, been an undisputed champion at 2 weights.
And the champion overall in 4. This is how obtuse the arguments against Terence Crawford have become in the wake of his signature victory over Errol Spence Jr. You would have thought that the people who downplayed him before that fight would give him credit afterwards, and they've done anything but.
They didn't like him before. They like him even less now that he proved them wrong.
So after beating Tim Kazoo by a narrow margin on the scorecards, Fundora was met in the ring that night by former 3-belt welterweight champion Errol Spence Jr., who said he wanted Fundora next and was moving up to 154 pounds after his July 2023 destruction loss to Crawford. While that fight is perceived as the easier one to make because of Fundora and Spence's promotion by Al Heyman's PBC. Fundora promoter Samson Lukowicz has told Boxing Scene that Fundora wants to maintain his 2 belts and believes he can defeat the aging Crawford, who didn't possess the typical knockout power he had displayed in lower divisions.
Do you think Sebastian's gonna go through with this?
Samson Lukowicz is saying that he is, but Samson Lukowicz said a lot of things. He's not the kind of guy that you can take at his word.
The alternative.
They chuck the WBO title, surrender it to Terence Crawford, move forward with a fight with the winner of Tszyu versus Murtazaliev, which is likely going to be Tim Tszyu. They do the rematch with each other next year.
That's the alternative to fighting Crawford.
Remember who's ordering this fight. It's the WBO ordering this fight by way of Terence Crawford's WBO Super Champion status.
If push comes to shove, and it's getting there, and they don't want to do this, they can always surrender the WBO title because they still have the WBC.
That's if they don't want to do this. If they do, if a Crawford versus Fundora agreement can be struck, an interesting wrinkle will be where the fight takes place, because Lukowicz said Fundora wants the fight in America.
Well, I mean, Crawford versus Madrimov was in America, so I don't see why Crawford versus Fundora can't be in America.
Terence Crawford is strongly backed by Turki Al Sheikh, who has an awaiting date in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. December 21st, a card headlined by unified champion Alexander Usyk's rematch against former WBC champion Tyson Fury. Yet PBC is holding dates in Vegas in November and December 14th at the Crypto.com Arena in Los Angeles.
You think the PBC are trying to be at the helm of the promotion?
They might be, though at the same time, they seem to have had an existing plan to do a Pacquiao versus Barrios fight around that same time and Benavidez's ring return. So they may have those dates set aside already because of those fights. Not necessarily this one. I mean, if Turkey's footing the bill, then Turkey's the one in control.
Here's what I think.
I don't know that Errol Spence Jr. still is an alternative to Terence Crawford anymore. For Sebastian, I don't know that he's still really in the picture, because here we are at the end of August, over a year out from his fight with Terence, and he still hasn't announced who's supposed to train him, in tandem with this being less than ideal. These are less than ideal circumstances for a fighter coming off a demoralizing loss to move up to a new weight to take on a champion straight away. I don't know that Errol's really in the picture.
Maybe he's not.
But the winner of Tszyu versus Murtazaliev, they might be.
So even if Sebastian Fundora were to forfeit his WBO title to get out of this Crawford fight, he could always settle up with the winner of that fight and fight for another title.
It's not set in stone that just because the WBO orders it, or just because Samson said this and that, this fight happens. Samson says a lot of things. Remember when he said that they had a signed contract for David Benavidez versus David Morrell? It was over a year ago.
And that fight still hasn't happened.
I would love to see Sebastian Fundora go through with this fight and have it with Terence Crawford, but like I said, just because the WBO ordered it doesn't mean it happens.
At minimum, Terence will get a new belt. Whether he fights Sebastian and beats him for it, and I do think he would beat him, or Sebastian surrenders the belt without a fight. It seems to me that either way, Terence gets a new belt.
Though who he fights, if Sebastian decides to bail, that's the question. And finally, in men's super middleweight news, former champion turned analyst Paulie Malignaggi says the one and only reason Canelo is avoiding David Benavidez is because he knows Benavidez beats him easily, like a train running over a car that's stuck on the train tracks, Paulie told Talk Sport. I don't care who Canelo fights if he would vacate the titles. Personally, I've been saying this for 2 years. I think Benavidez runs him over like a train running over a car that's stuck on the train tracks. I stick with that. His apprehension to fight the mandatory continuously only cements my opinion.
You know what other opinions Paulie had in the past? Paulie picked George Kambosos to beat Devin Haney.
I don't think most people remember that. Ahead of their initial meeting, Devin's first fight, his first flight to Australia for George Kambosos for Undisputed, Paulie backed George to win. And coincidentally, Paulie doesn't really like Devin, or he didn't like Devin.
He used to take shots at him all the time. They had a back and forth publicly.
So I say that to say this. Paulie seems to me like a guy who, when he makes up his mind, he makes up his mind. If he doesn't like a guy, he doesn't like a guy. I don't think he likes Canelo any more than he liked Devin.
And I think his prediction for this fight has less to do with the boxers and how they box and more to do with who he likes on a personal level.
Don't pretend that it's uncommon. It happens all the time in the sport of boxing, how Teddy Atlas regularly picks against Anthony Joshua and Bob Arum.
They don't like Anthony on a personal level?
There's something about him that they don't like, that they're constantly picking against him.
I think there's something about Canelo Alvarez that Paulie doesn't like, that he's picking against him, like when he picked against Devin.
Now, people could say the same thing about me and David Benavidez, because I don't beat around the bush. I don't hide it, that I don't have a high opinion of that fighter, or his boxing, or his antics outside of the ring. I don't like David Benavidez. However, if I felt you were going to win the fight with Canelo, I would just say that.
I have before.
You guys know I don't like Gervonta Davis. I don't like that guy. But I don't make predictions on the premise of not liking him. I knew he would beat Ryan like I knew he would beat Frank Martin.
And I picked him to win those fights right here on this channel. You saw the videos. I don't make predictions on the premise of who I like more than who I don't like.
So even though I don't like David Benavidez, if I felt that he would win the fight, I would just say that. But you don't see me saying that. The reason for it,
he's basic.
A lot of you guys didn't listen to me when I told you that I knew he would beat Stephen Fulton. You didn't listen to me when I told you that Crawford would beat Spence, and you still didn't listen to me when I told you Usyk would beat Fury. You didn't listen.
No matter how many times I said it.
Some instances, I had been saying it for years, but you guys didn't listen.
Still don't.
I don't know if you're stupid or stubborn or what. You don't listen. You don't have to. My prediction ain't changing. I've got Canelo beating David.
And Bivol beating David, and Better Beef beating David.
I'll go as far as saying that I don't know. I don't know for sure that David Benavidez could handle a Callum Smith and Anthony Yard. I don't know for sure, because David is basic. And everything about David and his character as a fighter relies on him being the bigger guy in the ring.
It's the kind of thing that works up until it doesn't. After a while, being the bigger guy that's trying to make a weight can work against you.
So I don't get all caught up on what a fighter rehydrates to like some other people. I don't get all swept up in that weight bullying conversation, because I know how this usually ends for these quote-unquote weight bullies. A momentary advantage that eventually wears off. I think for David it's already worn off.
He can't make 168 healthy anymore.
If he tried to, for a fight with Canelo Alvarez, that's only going to amplify Canelo's power, amplify how much damage Canelo can do, because Canelo's not struggling to make 168. David is.
There's nothing unique about how David fights.
No challenge he presents that Canelo Alvarez hasn't already seen before in the likes of a Jaime Munguia, for example. He's a taller guy, he's a younger guy, he's a pressure guy, a volume guy. Same stuff as David.
Same style.
Stylistically, that fight favors the boxer puncher, the counter puncher. That fight favors Canelo, and physically,
Canelo's not busting at the seams. David is.
That Paulie Malignaggi has been in the sport as long as he has, and he doesn't make light of that. That's a pretty important detail. How healthy can David make 168?
The weight at which the contest takes place. This is how I know that Paulie's judgment is hampered by his personal feelings, because that's a pretty important detail.
He didn't mention it.